With the disaster curses about to make another appearance in the anime and us getting to see them fight against different opponents throughout Shibuya, I thought it would be a good idea to rank all of the disaster curses in order from weakest to strongest. Because although most people have a general idea of who should be at the top and who should be at the bottom of the disaster curses, in between it does get a bit confusing and some people do have conflicting ideas. But that is what today's video is for. I'm going to rank the disaster curses but also give full explanations for why I think that each of these curses is in the place that I put them in. So with that being said, let's start, and in fourth place I have Hanami. Hanami isn't weak by any means. We see that Hanami is actually sort of like a tank. As Yuji and Todo kept trying to beat down and jump Hanami, Hanami was able to endure all of the attacks and was even forced to actually absorb trees to gain curse energy back. Now, although Hanami was portrayed as super duper strong back at this point in time, I think that the interactions that Hanami had with Yuji and Todo, especially when taking into account the time that these interactions happened back in Goodwill, let us know that Hanami is the weakest of the disaster curses. Now we know that Yuji and Todo both individually have the power to damage Hanami. We know that they can't fully exercise Hanami with just their punches and kicks, but as Hanami says himself while getting jumped, both Yuji and Todo have the power to damage him. Now, just them being able to damage Hanami is very important, and I'll get more into detail about that as I get to the Dagon part of the video, but just keep note that Yuji and Todo being able to actually damage Hanami is super duper important. Hanami's biggest asset is his durability. How tough Hanami is what he uses the most in his fights. We see that even though Yuji and Todo can react and dodge out of the way of a bunch of Hanami's attacks, when they actually get in on Hanami and hit him, they don't fully exercise him. Yes, they make Hanami hurt, but they can't fully exercise Hanami. So we know that Hanami should just be around Goodwill Yuji and Goodwill Todo when it comes to raw power and speed. The only thing that I would say Hanami has over them is durability. There's even a moment where Yuji is able to close the distance on Hanami after Hanami throws some flower buds, and once Yuji gets up on Hanami, he's able to kick him multiple times in the face, which Hanami even has to respect his speed by saying he's fast, more agile than the girl. Now, although Hanami does say here that Yuji's strength is disappointing, we see further into the fight that whenever Yuji starts landing punches on Hanami, he says that Yuji has the power to damage him. Now, Hanami does have an arsenal of attacks. We see Todo even analyze all of them. The roots that Hanami uses, the wooden ball, the cursed bud, and the flower field. Now, even though all of these attacks are effective whenever they land, the problem is they actually need to land, and they aren't that fast, as we see that Goodwill Yuji and Todo can just dodge all of them. And even after calculating all of the attacks that Hanami has, Todo still thinks that Yuji and himself have a guaranteed victory. And if you've noticed, every time I've talked about a Hanami feat, I always mention that these feats were done on a Goodwill Yuji and a Goodwill Todo. This is because we know that Yuji and Todo, especially Yuji, has gotten massively stronger from Goodwill throughout Shibuya, which is where the other scaling of the disaster curses comes in and where the other disaster curses begin to scale higher, and I will get more into detail about that as soon as I get to the Dagon part. But all of Hanami's main things we see in Goodwill. Whenever Hanami goes to fight against Gojo, he just gets absolutely spliffed. So there's not much that we can take from that fight because he's just much weaker than Gojo. Another thing we know about Hanami is that his main trait, his big thing, is supposed to be his durability. We see that Hanami is compared to Jogo at the end of a chapter, and it says that if Jogo had taken the same amount of attacks from Yuji and Todo that Hanami did, Jogo would have been exercised. Now, of course, we see that Jogo says those attacks wouldn't have even hit him, and the chapter extra also says that even though Jogo is stronger, Hanami is more durable. But the thing is, since toughness is supposed to be Hanami's big thing, his main trait, the problem is, I don't even think Hanami is the most durable of all the disaster curses. He definitely was at the time of this statement, but at the time of this statement, Dagon was still a cursed womb, and we also saw that Mahito was much weaker. But as we see Mahito grow, especially near the end of his life, and whenever Dagon blooms into his full form, I think that both Mahito and Dagon have higher durability than this Hanami. So we see that Hanami's main trait, the thing that he is known for, he's just third place at with all the disaster curses. You know, he's only more durable than Jogo, and Jogo just has many more things that make him stronger than Hanami. plus the statement just says Jogo is stronger than Hanami, but I'll get into all of those things when we get to Jogo's part. But the main thing is, at the point of this statement, you could have an argument for Hanami being one of the stronger disaster curses, but as the Shibuya incident went on, we begin to see all of the other disaster curses have better feats that scaled them much higher than Goodwill Yuji and Goodwill Todo, to the point where we can say for sure that the other 3 disaster curses are definitely stronger than Hanami. And the thing that sucks about Hanami the most is that we didn't even actually get to see his domain expansion. We saw it begin to come out, but we didn't even get to see what it could do. All of the other disaster curses, we got to see their domain expansions, but we never even saw one for Hanami, so the only thing we can go off of for his strength is his physical stats and curse techniques. So there is a chance that Hanami's domain is something super busted and we never got to see it, but there's also a chance that his domain is something that wouldn't have been that extraordinary and still would have made us think that he was the weakest of the bunch. But sadly, we never got to see it, so we can't make any conclusions on his domain expansion. We can only rank Hanami based on what we know. Now, next up we have Dagon. And remember how I kept saying that Yuji being able to damage Hanami and Goodwill was very important? Well, it's because there is a line of scaling we need to get through so we can put Dagon's durability above Hanami's. Remember Ino? He's sort of like Nanami's subordinate, and we see that he always looks up to him. We see that whenever Yuji is trying to punch the barrier to get into Shibuya, Ino looks at Yuji's punch and says, seriously, if we're talking straight striking power, he might be on the level of Nanami's. So according to Ino, Yuji and Hanami at this point in time have about the same amount of striking power. And this is very important because we see that Yuji was able to damage Hanami, but Nanami, even when landing a direct ratio attack on Dagon's arm, wasn't able to do any damage whatsoever. Nanami even said that it felt like Dagon had boundless HP and that their attacks were doing no damage. So we have a Yuji that can damage Hanami, and this Yuji is supposed to have the same striking power as Nanami, and this Nanami can't make a dent on Dagon whatsoever. It feels as if Nanami is knocking against somebody with boundless HP. So that's just a way to deduce that Dagon should be tougher than Hanami, which is very important since toughness is Hanami's main thing. Dagon is able to beat out Hanami at what he's best at, which is durability. Now, when it comes to offense, outside of his domain expansion, we don't know exactly what Dagon can do. We know that he has a big water ball that Maki compares to Megumi's Max Elephant, and she doesn't just compare to Max Elephant, she says that Dagon's water is much greater than Megumi's Max Elephant. And we also know that outside of his domain, there was a point in time in which Dagon caught an attack from Maki, and Maki said that if Naobito didn't step in, then she would have died. So the only thing we know about Dagon outside of his domain expansion is that he should be far tougher than Hanami, but he also should have enough power to kill Maki relatively quickly. Another interesting thing about Dagon is that he also admits inferiority in speed when it comes to Jogo. He refers to Jogo's speed whenever he's getting blitzed by Naobito. It seems that Jogo is like the staple for speed within the disaster curses, but I'll get more into detail about that in the Jogo part of the video. It's just that we know that outside of his domain, Dagon isn't supposed to be extremely fast, he's just supposed to be powerful and super durable. Now, inside of Dagon's domain expansion, we see that the Shikigami he uses are really broken. They move so fast that it seems that they are almost instant. Maki even says that it feels as though the Shikigami that bit her didn't even exist until it bit her, meaning that the Shikigami just sort of teleported to her and bit a chunk of her side out. We also know that while Dagon was fighting against Naobito and Maki and Hanami in his domain expansion, Dagon was focusing 70% of his power on Naobito and 30% on Hanami, and we saw that Dagon was able to take an arm of Naobito's off, so this means he was able to do this with only 70% of his power focused on him. Now, we know that Dagon's life gets cut short as soon as Toji enters the domain expansion, but there is one interesting thing that I want to bring up, and you guys can take this statement as you will. We see that even though Dagon was getting extremely blitzed by Toji, he said that if he could just weaken Megumi and crush him, if he could just get the sure hit of his domain back, then Dagon thinks that he would be able to beat Toji. Now, whether this is true or not, we'll never actually know. It is just a hypothesis that Dagon has after interacting with Toji's strength, but I would guess that Dagon still would have lost to Toji because I don't think that the domain sure hit would have been able to recognize Toji. We learned more about that whenever Maki was fighting against Naoya, that bodies like Toji's are treated like buildings, so I don't think that even if he got his sure hit back, that he would have just beaten Toji with a sure hit attack. I think that Toji's body would have been registered as a building and Toji would have just continued to blitz Dagon until he died. So the main reasons I have Dagon above Hanami is 1, the durability scaling that I brought up earlier, plus domain feats, which does suck for Hanami because we never got to see his domain expansion. But just going off of what we know, I think that Hanami would be 4th and Dagon would be at 3rd place. Now, the ranking for the last 2 disaster curses is a bit contentious, as I do believe that there are good arguments for both Jogo and Mahito being the strongest disaster curse, but I think that there's just a couple arguments that edge over one person for the other for me, and with that being said, the person I have in 2nd place is Jogo. I think Jogo got done dirty by having to fight against the 2 strongest guys in this series. You know, we never got to see him fight against somebody around his power level. He always had to fight Gojo and Sukuna in his 2 main fights. And even though he did get slapped in both fights, there are a couple things we can take from those fights, as well as some statements that we know from the other disaster curses to tell how strong Jogo is. Starting off, we know that Jogo is supposed to be basically the benchmark for speed in the disaster curses. We see in the chapter extra earlier in the story, whenever we get this information that Hanami is more durable than Jogo, Jogo says that, oh well, all of those attacks that hit you wouldn't have even hit me in the first place, meaning that he would have been fast enough to dodge them. And then we see whenever Dagon was getting blitzed by Naobito, Dagon immediately thought of Jogo's speed. He didn't think of anybody else's but Jogo's speed. So according to Dagon, Jogo is about Naobito level in terms of speed, but one thing about this statement is that Naobito wasn't finished stacking. We don't know if Jogo would actually scale to a full speed Naobito or not. We just know that in this short moment of getting blitzed, Dagon thought of Jogo when it came to speed. And when it comes to strength, it's sort of hard to tell how hard Jogo can hit, because whenever he burned Naobito, Nanami, and Maki, they were all like on their deathbeds from their fight with Dagon. What we can sort of go off of is the Sukuna statement whenever Jogo is fighting him, and whenever Jogo launches Max Meteor. First, in the fanbook, we know that Maximum Meteor is supposed to be large enough to take out an entire city. And then we know that whenever he used it against Sukuna, Sukuna actually said that it would have damaged him if it hit him. Now, whether Sukuna was 100% serious about this or not, maybe he was. And if he was serious about this, then it is really impressive that Jogo can make an attack that would damage 15 Fingers Sukuna. The only thing about this Maximum Meteor is that it is extremely slow. We saw that all of the weaker sorcerers in the area, like Panda, were able to dodge the meteor at last second and take no damage from it. So we know that the Maximum Meteor is supposed to be a super damaging attack, but it is fairly slow. Also, it is sort of hard to tell how fast the other attacks that Jogo has are. Like, remember when he can throw lava heads at walls? We saw that he was able to hit and kill Naobito with this attack, but the only problem was Gege outright told us that the reason Naobito got caught here was because he had one arm and was slowed down and weakened from his fight with Dagon. So we never got to see Jogo's true potential in attacks against somebody who wasn't just Gojo or Sukuna. And the one time that we did get to see Jogo fight against other sorcerers, they just happened to be fully weakened from a fight against Dagon. Jogo does get an impressive statement about his strength from Gojo though, and that is that at the start of Gojo's fight against Jogo, Gojo says that Jogo is stronger than current Sukuna. And the current Sukuna at this point in time is 3 Fingers Sukuna. So, I mean, even though it is only 3 fingers of strength, we know that Gojo does say that Jogo is stronger than this, and 3 Fingers Sukuna also isn't weak. We see that during Shibuya, Megumi compares Toji's speed to a 3 Fingers Sukuna, and Sukuna even thinks that in his 3-finger form, Maharaga may have been able to beat him. So being 3-finger level isn't a downscale at all. Being 3-finger level in strength is actually impressive, and it is one of the benchmarks that we have to go off of for Jogo's strength. One thing about this statement though is that even Mahito Mahito, after encountering Sukuna when fighting Yuji, says that even though Jogo has more curse energy than Sukuna, Sukuna's soul is on another level, which is one thing about the Gojo statement. He is probably basing this statement off of Jogo's curse energy amount, because the fight between himself and Jogo hadn't even started yet. We also have a statement from Hanami and Naobito at the end of their fight with Dagon, just outright saying that compared to that cursed Dagon, this curse is on another level. So this is just another statement for Jogo asserting himself above Dagon and Hanami, saying that compared to Dagon, Jogo is on an entirely new level. So I think for all of these reasons, Hanami and Naobito just outright saying that Jogo is on another level than Dagon, compared with the things that we know about Jogo's statements from Sukuna and Gojo, coupled with Jogo being the benchmark for speed, leads me to believe that Jogo undoubtedly has earned his right as the second strongest disaster curse. And in first place we have Mahito. Mahito is the definition of hacks within Jujutsu Kaisen. Everything Mahito does, from the way he attacks people to the way you attack him, is just unconventional. Mahito is also the truest definition of a curse within Jujutsu Kaisen, which is one of the reasons that he grows as fast as he does, and we even know that this is the reason Jogo propped Mahito up as the leader of the disaster curses, because Mahito continues to grow at an extreme rate. The thing with Mahito compared to basically everybody else in the entire series is that if you let Mahito touch you, you've basically lost the fight. Now this wasn't always true whenever he was much weaker at the beginning of the series, because we saw that Hanami was able to subconsciously protect part of his soul, but even back then Mahito felt that if he could just touch Hanami a few more times, he would be able to transfigure him. We also know that you can't even damage Mahito unless you touch his soul. Mahito has said multiple times that conventional attacks won't work on him, and trying to just exercise him by hitting him over and over and over again is just basically useless. So the only way you can actually even take out Mahito is if you can touch the soul. Now this in itself just makes it basically impossible for 99% of sorcerers to even fight against Mahito. Combined with the fact that Mahito grows so fast, we see that Mahito is able to copy a 0.2 domain expansion that he learns from Gojo after only seeing it one time. And we know that whenever you're trapped inside Mahito's domain, you've practically lost the fight. We see that it says in the fanbook, inside Mahito's domain, idle transfiguration affects the target even if he hasn't touched them. Death is certain to those who don't possess anti-domain techniques. So we know that anywhere you are in Mahito's domain, he can transfigure your soul, which means that he can change your form to a tiny human to where you cannot even control yourself anymore and you're now rendered unable to fight. Also, at the end of Mahito's life, we see that he lands a black flash and he just understands his soul completely and he gets a new form. This new form is called the Instant Spirit Body of Distorted Killing. In this form, we see that his toughness or durability increases by 200%. Mahito also gains these long blades that he's able to fight with, and once he's hitting Yuji with a flurry, Yuji says that his attacks won't even reach Mahito anymore, and that now Mahito is something completely different than he was before his transformation. Now we know that Yuji ends up hitting a black flash and beating Mahito in this fight, but it is interesting to think about. In a chapter extra, Gege says that if Yuji hadn't nailed Mahito with this black flash, Mahito would have torn Yuji to shreds. Now it is just a testament to how much stronger this new form of Mahito is than his previous form. Also the fact that if this black flash from Yuji hadn't been hit, Mahito truly would have just killed Yuji and torn him to shreds. Gege is telling us here that in this moment Mahito was stronger, it's just that it was that one scenario where Yuji landed a black flash and won the fight. The most important thing about Mahito is that we don't even know how strong he would have ended up being. He probably would have been as strong as Sukuna one day, because we saw that Mahito grew extremely fast from the beginning of the story. He was able to unlock a domain expansion in just his second fight in the series, and after fighting him, Hanami even said if the Jujutsu Society wasn't quick in exercising Mahito, they would be past the point of no return. But sadly, Mahito's life was cut short by a black flash from Yuji Itadori. I wonder how strong Mahito would have ended up, but it's sad that we'll never get to see. And that is my ranking for the disaster curses. If you have any comments or if you think I should have changed around some places, then let me know in the comments below and I will definitely check them out. Because although I do think that most people agree that Hanami and Dagon are the two weakest disaster curses, and most people agree that Jogo and Mahito are the two strongest, people tend to have their own order for where they would place these disaster curses. So if you have any feedback, then I'd really appreciate it. Also, I want to thank you so much for reaching the end of the video, and if you enjoyed, then I'd really appreciate if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as I do post on different topics that you guys give me and a few that I come up with on my own. Thank you for watching. See you next time.